Good evening. The content of this presentation is proprietary and confidential information of the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative. It is not intended to be distributed by any party without the written consent of the collaborative. Attendees should know that the educational component of this session is being recorded and will be published on the collaborative's YouTube page. To maintain complete confidentiality, an announcement will be made before recording begins, and only the presenter will be identified during the recording. Therefore, to ensure that it is anonymous, all attendees are asked to mute their microphones until an announcement is made that a recording is complete. Presentations are intended for educational purposes only and do not replace independent professional judgment. The ideas expressed in this presentation are the professional opinion of the presenter and do not necessarily represent those of the Florida Firefighter Safety and Health Collaborative or its constituents. Before acting on any of the information presented, attendees should consider the appropriateness of the information as it pertains to their individual situation and seek independent professional advice should any concerns arise. If you or anyone you know are in what is believed or perceived to be a situation that is or may become harmful, please reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline via phone at 1-800-799-SAFE, 1-800-799-7233, or through their website, thehotline.org, or as always, in the event of emergency, dial 911. With that, we are very grateful to welcome the Hurd groups and the former collaboratives, Jeremy Hurd, this evening. I have been humbled to work with Jeremy a number of times to really see the true depths of his chaplaincy at Surfside just a number of weeks ago, to see what a difference spirituality can make in the lives of everybody, not just first responders. Jeremy, so grateful to welcome you here this evening and to discuss how spirituality plays a role in first responder prevention of suicide, and how families as well can join in the conversation of spirituality in suicide prevention. So with that, again, thanks so much for being with us, and take it away.
All right, thank you. Well, after that disclaimer, I'm worried about whoever the speaker is. Actually, and then I realized it was me, so I was a little bit intimidated. But thank you for that. I know those are very important information that you give, because we want people to understand how important this topic is and how important it is that we seek help when we need it. One of the things I wanted to say, first of all, was thank you, Michelle, for scheduling me on the opening night of the NFL season. I really appreciate that. It's not as if the game begins in 9 minutes or anything, but I wanted to be very, very clear about the fact that for everybody who would like to know, I am not cheering for the Buccaneers tonight. They hurt my team last year, and so I'm very upset still. So I'm still working through it myself. So I won't be watching any of that anyway. But it is a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to talk to each of you about this topic, and it's something a little different because I've taught all over the country on the topic of mental health, and in that topic, we've covered a lot of different things. We've talked about awareness, we've talked about prevention, we've talked about resiliency, we've talked about post-traumatic growth. And in those discussions and on those slides, there are times where we will talk about spirituality and how to address it. And then I've actually taught chaplain classes where we really focused on the chaplain side of things, the spirituality side of things. But I've never really done an entire class on it. And when Michelle asked me to do it, I thought, yeah, we'll work on it. And for the last few weeks, I've jotted some thoughts down, jotted some notes down, and decided actually last week that I wasn't going to do a PowerPoint, because the more I got into this, the more I really wanted it to kind of be a little more informal. And I'm going to actually involve some of the chat room here, because I'd like to ask some questions just to get some ideas of what you all are, where you come from, what's going on with your view of spirituality as well as we get into this, because it's important we understand how spirituality plays in this world. And I don't normally give a lot of my background when I teach, because I think where we're at and what we're doing right now in the fire service with first responders specifically is enough to kind of get the topic going, and then you kind of get to know the instructor as you move along. But it's kind of important in this topic because as I share with you my background, I want you to understand where I come from and how I viewed spirituality to how I view it now. Um, so while I'm doing this, if you guys want to on the chat room, you can just basically answer this question: how were you raised as it relates to spirituality? You don't need to get a huge long answer here, but if you were excuse me, if you were raised Catholic or Jewish or Muslim or agnostic or atheist or whatever, you could just put that down if you feel comfortable doing it. You don't have to, but I'd be interested to see where you come from because I'm going to share a little about that with me right now, and a lot of that comes from our parents, the influences we had on us when we were growing up, and those influences describe to us what the world should look like. Excuse me. And here's what I mean by that. I grew up in the Midwest. Grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, which is why I'm a Chiefs fan. So you guys can see I come by it naturally. It's not as if they're finally good, and so now I cheer for them. I've been cheering for them all my life, even when they were really, really bad. Um, Grew up in Kansas City, and I grew up in and I'm going to give you the term. It's Independent Fundamental Baptist, and if you want to look it up, there's some great stories out there about corruption within the IFB movement. Shortly after I graduated from high school, there was a lot of different stories that came out. But that's how I grew up. I grew up in this Independent Fundamental Baptist Church, and how I would describe it is this: I would describe it extremely conservative, religiously, spiritually, and politically, all the above. And when you grow up like that in an environment that is, this is right, this is wrong, there's nothing wrong with that part of it. When it starts to carry over into what I would consider legalism, and if you know anything about the scriptures in the Bible, Pharisaical, where it's all about rules and religion and information and what you have to do and rules and laws, and then there's no understanding of relationship with other people or with God. That's really how I grew up, and fortunately, my parents were very balanced. It was the environment they felt comfortable being in. So as a result, I had parents who really helped me see the world for what it really was, and an environment at this church and school where I was at where it was extremely conservative. I tell you all that because what happens as you're growing up is you have this, I call it a worldview, a philosophy, whatever term you want to use. You call it a filter, rose-colored glasses, whatever you want, but it's how you see the world, and it's the lenses through which you see society. You see right and wrong. You see morals. You see ethics. And I came up in that very black and white environment where there was no gray, and it was always right or wrong, and there wasn't a lot about relationships. And I got to college, and then I came to Florida and started teaching, actually at a private school that was very similar in that background and thrust, and continued to do that, and just kind of lived in it. And when I turned 30 years old, I started in the fire service. So you can imagine, those of you who understand the fire service and first responder world, what a culture shock that was for me, living my first 30 years in that very dogmatic environment, and then all of a sudden sitting in this environment where it's not. And it's not at all about religion. But what I found very quickly was that there was a lot about spirituality. So there was a lot of talk about spirituality, about God, a higher power, things like that. And so there was this basic understanding of what spirituality was. And I'm noticing on the chat, see Baptist. I like the one that says Catholic then Baptist. That's great. I love the ones that are one thing then something else. Christian, Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, Catholic. Catholic, then got sober 13 years ago. Now spiritual, raised Methodist, not saved till 29. Serving in different churches. So these are great answers, and some of you already got ahead of me a little bit, because one of the questions I want to ask a little later, and you don't have to answer this one on the chat, but I'd like for you to think about where you are now in comparison to how you were raised, because that how you were raised sets that tone and sets the foundation. But what happens is you then start making your own determinations. So as I got into this fire service world, after growing up a little bit as an adult, those first 8 years out of college, I found myself really evaluating what the world looked like. I had gone through a divorce. I'd realized that life wasn't quite as perfect as I thought it was. And I got into this fire service world where everyone is trying to take care of other people. It's a lot of adrenaline junkies, a lot of type A personalities, a lot of risk-taking behavior. Still had my same basic background and kind of continued living the way I was going to live. And then a few years into that, became the chaplain. And the story of how I became a chaplain is rather lengthy. Um, but I will tell you a portion of it. The first part I will tell you is this: I ended up with a line of duty death in my department. I had about 4 years on the job at the time, and I had been in the process for the last year, between year 3 and 4, of working with my chief on how to develop a chaplain program. I had no desire to be the chaplain. It really wasn't my plan, but I did study ministry in college, which is why I came out and worked at a church in the school coming out of college. And so I had a basic background of that and how to take care of people. I had done a couple funerals and a wedding or two. And so I thought, you know what, FDNY has one. Why don't we have a chaplaincy? So my goal was basically to help set it up and establish it and become a liaison to the local clergy. We had a line of duty death after about a year of conversations, and my chief basically just went, "You are knighted chaplain," and announced me as a chaplain. And I became the chaplain. On my first act as chaplain was leading that line of duty death funeral, with not really a clue of what I was doing, but kind of understand the basics and did what I needed to do and learned what I needed to learn. Went to a chaplain conference, learned some more basics, learned from some older chaplains who had some experience in the world and really understood it and were able to give me some tips, and then started learning. What I found very quickly was I shifted from a world where when someone needed help, I could take a Bible, open it, go to a passage of scripture and say, "I think this is the answer to your problem." And that was my answer. That was how I had lived. That's how I was raised. And I want to make sure I'm very clear. I'm a very firm believer in the scriptures and the Bible. I'm a Christian to this day. Um, but I also view differently how I talk to other people about my background. And what I learned was I was quickly now involved with firefighters who did not have the same background as me, did not have the same filter, same vision, same worldview, same philosophy that I did. And so I found myself talking to or leading a funeral for a Jewish family, an agnostic family, a Muslim family, an atheist family, and really just having interactions with individuals who believed very different from me, but for some reason still wanted my help. And I think that was where I really started to realize this is not about witnessing to someone else. This is not about proselytizing or evangelizing or trying to convince someone of something you believe. It's about, and I had a pastor who taught me this years ago, and I thought it was really good. He goes, "Our life should be about meeting people where they are and loving them to where they should be." And it wasn't about changing their life or changing their world, but wherever they're at, you meet them, you go meet them, you go help them, you love them. And if they end up one day believing the exact same way I do, that's fine. If they end up believing something completely different, but if in the meantime I can help them, that's what I'm going to do. If in the meantime I can assist them, and I think the story from the scriptures that comes up a lot in my mind is the story of the Good Samaritan. The story, if you don't know it, of the Samaritans and the Israelites, the Jews, they hated each other, didn't get along. In fact, they would literally go around areas to avoid different tribes, different people. So a trip that should take an hour might take them 3 or 4 hours just to avoid a group of people, that sort of thing. So just kind of keep that in mind as you think about the story. And so here, this individual is beaten, all his money's taken, he's left there for dead, and basically what happens is the equivalent of two religious leaders come by, walk by, one kind of walks by him and the other one walks kind of on the other side of the street, and then the Samaritan, and in that terminology in that time, the Samaritan was the lowest of low. The Israelites, the Jews, they hated them. They thought they were the second class citizens, and this individual who would have no reason to get along with this individual stopped him, saw his issues, said took compassion upon him, cleaned his wounds up, got him to a hotel, told the innkeeper, "Hey, whatever the charge is, I'll pay for it. I'll be back later." Because the question that got asked was, what are we supposed to do? What's our neighbor? Who's our neighbor? And he goes, "Well, who do you think it was in that story that was the one who took care of him? It was this guy. It wasn't the religious leader. It wasn't anybody else." And I think that's what I finally came to, was I realized that we're not about the spiritual position we know or learn or are taught in our life. What we are is spiritual beings who are supposed to be taking care of others, regardless of who they are. And so I've learned that. Still learning it, still working on it. But what I figured out is that in this fire service world, we have hundreds of different belief systems and structures, and those people are now coming to you or me, and this is really what we're going to talk about tonight, is if they're coming to us for help and for assistance, we can't just go back to all we know. Now we can go to our experience, we can go to the truths and the religious principles and scriptural principles that we know and see how they apply to that person, but we have to understand where they're at, and we have to understand how to assist them. And the way you assist them is you still speak truth, you still love, you still encourage, but you may not use your scriptural reference that you're from, or that you understand, and your base of knowledge. I think that was really kind of the biggest key that I learned. And so I wanted to kind of share a couple of stories tonight as we get into this. There's no better illustration of that than what took place a few months ago here uh, with the Surfside collapse. Michelle hit it right on the head earlier. This is a very largely Jewish community. Um, I had been down there to visit when I first moved down to Florida. First moved down to the area. I had been down there. A friend of mine took me to Bal Harbor in that area, and we kind of saw it. Thought it's a really cool place. Never thought about or crossed my mind that there might be a different kind of ethnic group that lived there, or a religious group or whatever. And it was very clear by the people who were I was meeting that it was a very largely Jewish population. The and I'll probably get some of the names wrong, but I believe Hatzalah, CSE, and the chaplains, the rabbis from Miami-Dade, both police and fire, unbelievable. I mean, I got to tell you, what they did for that community was incredible. The Israeli team who came down, just amazing. And both from the spiritual religious side, also from the cultural side, language, all those different things. It was really, really neat. In fact, the one Friday night I was there, they started, they were going to celebrate Shabbat, and they were going to start Friday night. And it was really cool to kind of watch everybody come together and go, well, this isn't where my synagogue is or where I normally would be, but this is where I'm going to be because these are my people. And this is where we're going to worship tonight. And this is where we're going to pray. And this, all of these things. Now, obviously, the tragedy had brought all of them together, but that sense of family and that sense of belonging was just very powerful to watch. But I couldn't, there's no way I could minister to that group by pulling out the Bible, specifically the New Testament, and reading scripture. Well, what's wrong? Well, you don't agree with what I believe. And that seems very obvious to us. But what I found is there are a lot of very well intentioned people who have wanted to be chaplains with me in my department, who actually believe what I believe, probably if we lived near each other, would attend the exact same church I attend, who I've said, no, I don't think you're a good fit because you believe so strongly in where you're at and what you're doing that you can't step away from that at all to assist. And you can't help someone who's different from you or believes different from you. So that's the first thing I want you to get across. It's imperative for us to meet people where they are. And I believe that's really the epitome of what God asks us to do anyway. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you kind of have to, the balance is being able to hold your beliefs, hold on to them, because I don't think we should change who we are, and to believe what we believe, but to still be able to step outside of that to help people. So I want to make sure we're clear that you don't just go, oh, here's what I grew up believing. It was this set of values, and I'm just going to totally disregard that so that I can help this person. No, we don't disregard it, but it may not be the way to meet that person's need. And I hope that makes a little bit of sense, but it's imperative that we stop kind of holding on to those beliefs and saying, I can't let go of anything right now. Believe it, hold on to it, keep it in your heart, but it may not be what you lead with. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, this, I didn't even have this in my notes, but it just popped in my head, so I'm going to mention it now. And you guys are all muted, so I can say whatever I want anyway. One of the things I will tell you from your perspective, but also others when you're helping them, is try not to over spiritualize your comments when there's loss. And here's what I mean by that. One of the frustrations I hear from people who lose loved ones when there's death, they hate the over spiritualized stuff like having got another angel. God needed your wife or mother or child or in heaven with him. Because the people I've talked to look at me and go, no, he didn't. I needed them. And this, it's kind of one of those, how do you help people? Well, you don't help them with soliloquies or little platitudes. You help them by loving on them. And one of the things that I've talked about with with the spiritual side of things is it's very important to know that, and this is my belief, so you may not agree with me, but this is what I say. I say, I think whatever your emotions are, it's okay when you have this loss because God can handle it. And I think when I grew up, that's one of the things that I've changed because as I grew up, I was taught, well, you can't be angry at God, you can't be mad at God, you can't be upset with Him. You just have to trust everything implicitly and just know it's all going to be okay. And I've changed my mind over the last years and realized that God's okay with me having a real conversation with Him and saying, "Hey, I don't get it. I'm not okay with this. I don't know what you're doing or where you're headed, but I'm not okay." Now, a lot of times God reminds me that I'm wrong and He's right, and so we work through it. But I think those real conversations sometimes are things you have to be able to say to someone and go, "Hey, I get it. I don't agree with everything that's happened in my life, but I still trust who I believe to be God, the higher power, the one that is in charge of my life." So being able to not over spiritualize what you say to people and trying to give them that answer that helps them with death is a huge thing. Let them go through the 5 stages of grief. Let them understand and experience that, and then be there to walk through it with them. What I've really understood over the years is the power of the combination of mental health and spirituality. My belief system, my Judeo-Christian belief system, and science, and emotions, and the study of emotions, and all of these things intertwine and come together. And I found that when I first got into the chaplaincy, many of the people who were the old timers in the chaplaincy didn't really want to hear what I had to say about it. They thought I was basically losing my mind that I would talk about anything other than God. I couldn't talk about the science behind how people deal with emotion, and they didn't understand that. And so I had to really learn a little bit about how to handle that myself, but also what I really believed. And so I believe that as we are helping people in the spiritual realm and helping them spiritually, emotionally, all of that stuff ties together. So we have to study. We have to keep up with what's going on, keep up with how people are coping, teach them how to cope. I will be very upfront. I tell people straight up when they ask me, how do I deal with this? I said, well, would you like to know how I deal with it? And most people say yes because they're desperate, they're looking, they've just lost a loved one or some tragedy has happened. And I look at them and I go, I pray. For me, getting on my back patio, sometimes having a little music on and praying. And that's what I do. Like to me, that faith piece is very, very important. And no matter what has happened in my life, good or bad, I find myself kneeling down and just looking at God and saying, either I don't understand, thank you for what you did for me. We talk all the time. And I know for me, that helps me deal with what's happening. And on the firefighter side, when I'm dealing with something that's just overwhelming, when I've got that call, when I've got that pediatric case, when I've got that one I don't know what to do next, it's imperative for me that I can stop and do something about it and pray and get my mind right. It doesn't work for everybody, but that's how I deal with it. And I've even talked to people now. I'm in the administrative side of things here at my job, and so Chris Bader and others will remind you of the fact that I am no longer a real firefighter. They'll probably try to tell you that, but in that role, I found myself doing it even more. As things come along and as decisions are made, I find myself looking for assistance and help. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't mean I have to tell everybody else, well, this is how you deal with it. No, maybe the way you deal with it is going out and hitting golf balls and you're good. Maybe it's going to the shooting range and putting some bullets down range. Maybe it's sitting by your lakeside property there and having a drink. Maybe it's having a cigar. Maybe it's going to the gym and working out. I don't care what it is, but I also have no problem sharing with people what part of mine is. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm getting off work. I have a few vacation hours I need to burn, and so I'm getting off work tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to the golf course. I'm going to go to the golf course with my buddy. We're going to play horribly. We are going to shoot the ball all over the course. I'm going to probably go through multiple sleeves of balls. I will not score well, but I'm going to have a good time. And if it rains, I'll keep playing. And when I come home, I'll probably be relaxed. That's not spirituality, but that's another way to handle the emotions that I've been dealing with over the last few weeks in this new role. And there's a way to plan to get out. And this Saturday morning, my wife will take me to the gym with her. She's a personal trainer, and she will beat me and make sure that I work out very, very hard. And so it's finding all those pieces that help you, but also working in what that spiritual side of things looks like. So I try to encourage people. Maybe it's meditation, maybe it's mindfulness, that mindful the mindful state of readiness, understanding, the basics of how that works. And maybe it's reading a book about spirituality. I don't know what it is, but what I try to do is open the door for people to go, hey, here's a few options, what do you think? Because the reality is, if they're coming to me, that's what they're looking for. And I wanted to touch on one more thing before I shift over to some protective factors. One of the things I found in the chaplain role specifically is this: I am the chaplain to those who don't have one. I am the church to those who don't have one. And here's what I mean by that. You can't really get t-shirts that say it, because I don't think it'd be accepted very well. But I'm the church to the churchless. I'm the pastor to the pastorless. Um, the people who have a church, a synagogue, um, their church home, and they have a very good sense of spirituality, and where they're probably not going to come to me. They may come to me for some basic things, but when they really need help, they're probably going to go to their clergy, that guy or girl who has been the person leading them down the path, the one who's been there for the birth of their children, for their marriage, for death. That's the person they're probably going to go to. The person who has no significant foundation or doesn't go to a place of worship on a typical basis, that's the one who's going to come to us and say, I need help. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule, and I get that there are some exceptions, but understand that that's the case. So I need to be prepared to go, if somebody's coming to me as the fire department chaplain, they probably have a very different base than I do. And so let's find out what it is. So I ask a lot of questions. First thing I do is say, hey, tell me about, what's going on in your life that we're talking right now. So they tell you what's going on, and whether it's a death or a tragedy or a financial burden or some other type of stress or whatever it is. Then I kind of find out where they're at, and they say, well, how do you cope with it? It's one of the next questions I ask. And once they tell me how they cope, I get a very good idea. If their answer for coping is, well, I pray. Oh, well, tell me about prayer. That's easy. You get right into the spiritual world and you start talking about what they've done. Or, hey, I talked to my pastor, I talked to my clergyman, I went to my church. That takes you down that path. If they're talking about the other coping skills, things that have nothing to do with necessarily with the spiritual side of things, that's okay, because eventually they're probably going to ask me how I do, and I'll tell them about prayer. But it doesn't mean it has to go that route. But I can still offer principles from my belief system without a Bible note on it. So, for example, when I talk to people during a death, I say there is a peace that passes understanding. Well, that's right out of a Bible passage. It's got a bunch more stuff at the end of it. But I tell them there is a peace. There is this peace that doesn't make any sense, and there is a way to find it. And I talk to people about that, and I use the term proverbs. It's proverbs, psalms. You can use those things without saying, in Psalm 100 verse 2 it says. So it doesn't have to be, maybe something from one of your catechisms from where you grew up, or maybe something from a prayer that you've read. It doesn't have to be put in that context. And it's not being misleading. It's just being, hey, here's the reality. Let me give you something and see if it helps you. And as you do that and you really read people, you'll understand and see what matches for them, what works for them, what kind of puts them in lock and step with you. And I've learned that if I don't try to win them over to what I believe, I'm much more able to help them, because then I can get them to the next step. And the next step might be a recovery center. The next step might be a treatment facility. The next step might be to a pastor or clergy in their belief system. By the way, you'll have that sometimes. Or you'll have, this guy who grew up Roman Catholic, and he comes and talks to you and says, "Hey, I need help with this, this, and this." And you start talking, and you say, "Well," you walk down that path, and you find out he's really looking for someone from his denominational background, but he just doesn't know where to start. So sometimes it's been me getting a hold of someone in the diocese where I'm at and going, "Hey, I got this firefighter. Would you be interested in talking to him?" Excuse me. Now, that's important also to know who those people are. You can't just hope that you find the right Catholic priest, Jewish rabbi, and just hope you find them at the right time. You need to cultivate those relationships ahead of time. So I work on that too. So it's one of the things I do with the spiritual side of things is make sure I open myself up to all different kinds of denomination. Make sure that you're getting to know people. One of the great places to do that is a lot of these individuals will be involved in Chamber of Commerce in your area. Another thing that people will be involved in is if there's a grand opening of something and one of them is doing an invocation, introduce yourself. I've met a couple of our Catholic priests here in the area who seem to always kind of be involved in first responder world. So I'm like, hey, I've gotten to know them by name. I've gotten to know their phone numbers, and I've directed people to them. If there are memorial services happening during holiday seasons, spend time getting to know people. So that's another thing you can do. Well, one of the things I want to talk about next is this. One of the things I teach about is the protective factors against suicide. And those protective factors, I'm just going to list them for you. It's one of the slides I have. I got it from somebody else. The factors that are here, and but it says social support, connectedness, belonging. We know about that. And the second thing is religion and spirituality. And I always talk about that in classes because I say religion and spirituality doesn't have to mean church. Because when you say religion and spirituality, this is why I asked you to do the chat thing at the beginning, because when we think of spirituality and religion, often we go right back to where we were at age 7 when our mom or dad had their arm around us on the pew or on the chair and were flicking us, telling us to stop talking, pay attention. That's kind of our perception of it. Or it's a perception that's even worse because it's somebody who may have gone through a really awful situation at their church where they went through abuse or one of their friends did or saw a cover up of that. That's happened in multiple different denominations. We also have people who've been hurt by the church in other ways, and then we also have people who just their only understanding is what they see in the news or the media or a movie or something like that. So understand that when you say the term religion or spirituality, people just immediately go to something. It's normally something way back when. It could be something more recent, whatever it is. You have to remember that you may be the best vision or the best illustration of religion and spirituality to somebody that they'll ever see. Because if the only thing they know is pain, hurt, negative communication, oh, my church was out for money, or my church never took care of the poor, or whatever the case may be, you may have an opportunity to change that perspective for people. So don't discount that. Remember that you have an opportunity to really change people's perception of that because it is truly a protective factor. The list goes on to mention sense of self-efficacy, easy accessible resources, acceptance of help, occupational family, especially in the fire service, the camaraderie, the fraternity, the family feel. But don't overlook the role that religion and spirituality plays. And I want to make sure I stop here for just one moment and let you know. I don't say all that I said at the beginning of this to discount using your specific spirituality to help someone, because it's very important to understand that when all the things line up, everything comes together, and that person who believes the way you believe may just simply need you to put your arm around them and pray. And if you're Jewish, do a specific prayer from your faith. If you're Catholic, from your wherever you're from, to have something specific is huge, and it can be so powerful. We had a suicide at our fire department at the fire station actually it's about a month and a half ago. It was just after Surfside actually, and I got to tell you, it's still hard to wrap my head around it. It's a station that I used to work at. It's actually he completed suicide in the bunk, in the same bunk where I used to be when I was at that station with about 3 or 4 years on the job. Everything was going fine. Didn't seem to be any issues, and he was in his bunk room and he put the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. I actually talked to his wife and daughter today even, and I just been following up. We did the service a few weeks ago. I gotta tell you, it was a very difficult time. Kay, there you go. Whoever you are, please mute. There you go. It was extremely difficult time for us to walk through that loss. But what I found, and one of the very interesting things is I knew all of the players over there, the guys who worked at the station. I knew them all except one by name. We're a very large department. We have almost 1,300 people in our department on the front line. So I don't know everybody, but I definitely don't know the backgrounds of all those people either. And even the ones I knew their name, I didn't know their spiritual backgrounds. And we're standing at the hospital. We've cleared everything up. It's time for them to go back. We're going to get them home for the rest of the night. And one of them looked at me and said, "Would you pray for us, Chaplain?" And I got to tell you, I knew that's what we needed, but I didn't want to. And here's what I mean by that. I, uh, I looked at him and I go, "You understand that when I start praying, I'm going to start crying because I know what's happening here. And when you stop and that spiritual environment comes in, it's a little overwhelming." And I knew it was coming. And sure enough, 5 words in, I was done. Um, but what I found over the years is the time for me to stop and pray when it's the right time has been very powerful. Every one of those guys hugged me, um, tears in their eyes, and just thank you. Now, they're all dealing with this in their own way. They're all responding in their own way. But I can tell you that's one instance and over years of instances where it's been powerful. I remember I did the 9/11 stair climb in Colorado years back when one of my friends had passed away, and he's from Colorado, and we went out there to honor him. And so we had done the all of the steps, however many hundreds of flights it was, and in Colorado the elevation's a little deadly when you're coming from sea level. So I was exhausted, had our gear on, had the packs on, and they were like, "Let's do one more." Well, that was another. I want to say it was another, I think 15 flights is what it worked out to. And I thought, oh. So I said, "Well, why don't we pray?" So I used it as an opportunity for us to get a break and be able to get a breath. But it was funny because we got everybody together, and just the power that comes in that from 10 people who all had different belief systems and maybe not involved in anything I'm doing or praying to their own higher power that might not be anything to do with me. It was really, really powerful for me to see that and to experience that and to know that, um, just to know that we were able to help. And so I don't want to discount the power of prayer, the power of your background and your spiritual background. It can be amazing. And I wanted to kind of wrap up this conversation before we go to some questions and some discussion with this. I uh, I also want to make sure that you are reminded of how powerful your relationships are, because we talk about the spiritual world, and I know that we think of spirituality as religion and as a church and denomination, but spirituality is more than that. And your relationships with people are extremely powerful in that spiritual world. And here's what I mean by that. I'm going to use a Surfside example again. Firefighters typically get the 911 call, go en route, pick up the patient, drop them off at the hospital, and peace. It's why it's one of the greatest jobs, because we do our thing and we help and we move forward, and we have our ADHD and squirrel, go, drop them off at the hospital, and then we hand over to the nurses who have to take care of this patient in ICU. And often we don't follow up just simply because of the fact that you can't get too involved emotionally with these patients, or it becomes a little overwhelming. Well, Surfside was very different. And as Michelle mentioned, I got there 3 days after the event took place, and I walked in and immediately felt different, because now you're standing there and you are looking in the faces of people who are desperate for you to find answers. They're they would could not care less what denomination you come from. They want everybody to pray with them. They want everybody to pray that they find their relative, that they want somebody they can talk to about their frustration about why, no, nothing's happening, and why we haven't found anybody, and why we're stopping digging, and all those different things. But the bonds that come is very different, because, as I said, we're used to dropping that patient off and we move forward. And then every day, all day long, you're with these individuals. And so, just so you know, what we did was we went to the site, we took the individuals to the site on these buses so they could see the site. And they prayed, they screamed, they cried, all of those things. And we walked through that emotion with them. And then afterwards, they hugged us. They said, "Thank you." And they developed bonds with us. And so instead of dropping these individuals off, these are people you're starting to build bonds with. And I remember saying to my wife, I was really grateful that Michelle and Dustin were there. Chris was there. Jeff was there. I didn't see Chris and Jeff as much because of where they were located, but I saw Dustin and Michelle every day, most of the day. And Michelle had, on that Saturday, my last day, I didn't see her as much that day because she had been put somewhere else. and I had moved around, and then Dustin had to go home. And I remember saying to my wife, I said, I was really depressed today. I said, I realized how sad I got without my people around me. And that's where the spiritual power comes from as well, with the people who are like-minded. And I didn't realize it until I went home that night, and I just kind of collapsed like, oh, now I got to get away from it. I know Michelle and others were there for a long time, and were not able to get away from it for a long time. But I had a family member of one of the ladies reach out to me. We got to know each other pretty well. I was down there, and she reached out to me. She found out that I had done a podcast on fire engineering, and I talked about the condo collapse and the suicide, and how, we just been dealing with things in our department and how we help each other out. And so she said she wanted to listen to it, and she reached out to me afterwards. She goes, "Thank you so much for sharing," and all these really nice things. And then she said, "But I would like to tell you something. It would be really great if something like this ever happens again, is when you leave, if you could connect me to someone who's taking your place, because you were my person, and then you weren't there." Now, there were people that took my place and stepped in the role, made all kinds of people helping, but I never thought about it like that. And I just wanted to share that with you as to kind of wrap this part up, because that's the power you have. We can be talking about a victim, a survivor, a firefighter, a cop, a military person, or a family member of yours. And you have the power to change their life by the words you say, by the actions. And there's a thing in the chaplaincy called the ministry of presence. I got to tell you, I use that so much because I don't always have the words. I like to talk. I like to share things with people, but there are times where there just aren't any words. And all you can do is just hug somebody. All you can do is put a hand on the shoulder, say, "I love you." All you can do is say, "I'm here. Do you want me to pray with you?" Don't underestimate the power that your presence has in their life, and the spirituality you bring into the midst of that tragedy and that chaos. Um, I'd love to open it up for some questions. So I think that Michelle needs to unrecord or stop recording or something that we need to do here. So I'm going to let her take that back over. So
We are still recording here on this platform for YouTube. So first I'll ask if anyone on here in the recorded setting has any questions. You can turn on those cameras if you'd like. And if you have any questions that you're willing to ask for the benefit of others for our YouTube recording, we would love to hear them now. And if not, that's cool. We'll stop the recording and just have that private, anonymous conversation after the recording stops. Okay, fair enough. Jeremy, I'm going to stop the recording for YouTube. And for YouTube's sake, once again, thanks for joining us. I'm so blessed to learn from you and grow from you, and to have grown with you during the class. And you are truly a brother to me. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording here.